I stepped out of the office building and froze mid-stride. The air was cold, the late sun flat against the pavement, but none of that mattered. My parking spot, my exact spot, was empty. Not a shard of glass, not a warning sign, not even a chalk mark on the pavement. Just a vacant strip of asphalt where my 2023 Camry should have been. For a moment I honestly believed my eyes were wrong. That somehow I was staring at the wrong row, or that I'd been so tired that morning I parked somewhere else entirely. But as I scanned the lot, 3 times, then 4, the truth sank into my bones like ice. The car I'd worked 6 years to afford was simply gone. My chest tightened until breathing felt like a chore. I kept checking the row and then my phone, as if one would correct the other. But reality stayed brutally consistent. The Camry, my first new vehicle, the one I baby-wiped the dashboard of every Sunday, had vanished without a trace. I dialed my parents because that's what I always did when the world felt too big. My mother answered with a voice so casually cheerful it stung. "Mom," I choked out. "My car, it's not here. Something's wrong. I don't know if it was towed or—" "Oh, sweetheart," she interrupted lightly, as if she were brushing aside a minor misunderstanding. "Don't panic. We let Elena take it. She needed wheels for her new job." I felt the ground tilt, the world dissolving into a ringing silence. "You gave her my car?" My voice cracked around the edges. She toothed, almost offended by my reaction. "You know she's always had terrible luck. She can't be riding the bus. You'll survive without the car for a bit." Then my father chimed in from the background, tone clipped and dismissive. "It's still in the family. Don't be dramatic." Their words hit harder than the empty parking space ever could, because suddenly the pattern of my whole life flickered before me, all the times I'd quietly absorbed things, so my sister never had to. All the times I'd been told I was the responsible one, the strong one, the one who didn't need as much attention, as much care, as much consideration. But this time was different. This wasn't borrowing a sweater. This wasn't taking my savings and calling it help. This was a $30,000 car purchased with years of grind and sacrifice. My hands shook, but my voice didn't when I finally said, "You took it without my permission." "Stop being selfish," my mother snapped. That word, selfish, was the crack that ran all the way through me. And for the first time in my life, I didn't bend. I didn't accept it. I hung up the phone, heart raging in my chest, and dialed a number I'd never dared call for family matters before. 911. And I had no idea then that reporting the theft would unravel everything I thought I understood about loyalty, responsibility, and family. Officer Ruiz showed up about 20 minutes later, the dying sunlight turning the parking lot a strange copper gold. Her presence was calm, steady, the kind of steadiness I desperately needed. She stepped out of the patrol car, clipboard in hand, and I instantly felt my lungs loosen just a bit. "All right," she said. "Walk me through what happened." My fingers trembled as I passed her my registration, insurance, the payment records, everything that confirmed the Camry wasn't a family asset to be shuffled around. It was mine. Fully, legally, indisputably. "All of this is under your name," she confirmed, flipping through the papers. "Yes," I said. "Every part of the purchase. And no one had permission to use the vehicle?" "No," I said, firmer this time. Saying it aloud grounded me in a way I didn't expect. "Absolutely no one." She nodded, expression sharpening with professional focus. "Then this is a vehicle theft." The words hit me with surprising force. Hearing a stranger, an authority, say it so plainly, without excuses, without family loyalty blurring the lines, cracked something open inside me. 4 years, everything involving my sister had been softened, minimized, reframed to protect her. But Ruiz wasn't doing that. She was calling it what it was. She photographed the empty parking space, radioed in a bolo, and took down my statement. When she said my sister's name over the radio, clearly, firmly, I felt something deep inside me wobble. It was like watching the first domino in a line tip over. Before she left, she said, "Just so you know, family doesn't change the legality. Theft is theft. Consent matters." It was such a simple sentence, but to me it felt revolutionary. When she drove off, the parking lot suddenly felt too big, the emptiness in front of me stretching wider than asphalt. I sat on the curb, elbows on my knees, and tried to breathe through the swirl of emotions hitting me from all sides. Relief, guilt, anger, fear, all tangled together. I went home, but my apartment didn't feel like mine anymore. I turned on the lights but kept them dim. Sat on the couch but couldn't lean back. Made tea but couldn't taste a thing. My phone buzzed again and again. Unknown numbers, distant relatives, family friends I hadn't spoken to in years, all leaving variations of the same message. Drop the report. Don't ruin the family. Be the bigger person. Elena needs support. Not one person asked if I had a way to get to work. Not one asked if I was okay, stranded in a parking lot while my life was being stripped away piece by piece. 4 years, I had been compliant, accommodating, quiet. But that night, sitting in the dim glow of my living room, surrounded by silence that felt both heavy and strangely liberating, something inside me shifted. I didn't answer any of their calls. Not out of strength, not yet, but out of exhaustion. Pure, bone-deep exhaustion from carrying a family that never once carried me back. 3 days later, just when I began questioning whether I'd made a terrible mistake, my phone rang, and the news on the other end set everything spiraling into a whole new direction. 3 days after filing the report, I was at my desk pretending to focus on code when my phone buzzed. The caller ID showed Officer Ruiz. My breath stalled like someone had pressed pause on my lungs. "This is Ruiz," she said. "We've located your vehicle." For a second, I couldn't speak. Relief and dread collided so hard in my chest it almost hurt. "Where?" I finally managed. "Your sister was pulled over for speeding near Aurora. The car has been taken to the impound lot for processing." Impounded. The word struck me like a blunt object. Heavy. Consequential. Real. "And my sister?" I asked, even though I already knew I would hate whatever the answer was. "She's fine," Ruiz said. "She's being questioned." "Fine." I repeated it like a bitter aftertaste. After we hung up, guilt surged like a wave I hadn't braced for. I pictured Elena sitting in a stark room, arms crossed, irritated rather than remorseful. I imagined my parents pacing, dialing anyone who would listen, already building a narrative where I was the villain. But underneath that guilt was a quieter feeling, something steadier. A sense of rightness I wasn't used to allowing myself. That evening I picked up a rental car and drove to the impound lot. The place was fenced in with chain link, floodlights bleaching the ground in harsh white. A tired-looking clerk pointed me toward the warehouse without bothering to hide his boredom. "Camry, silver row C," he mumbled. Inside, the air smelled like oil and dust. My footsteps echoed as I walked down the rows. Then I saw it, my car, and something inside me dropped. It wasn't the same vehicle I'd left in that parking spot days earlier. Fast food bags littered the floor. Makeup smudges streaked the passenger door. Sticky stains coated the cup holders. Mud caked the mats. My emergency supplies, blanket, first aid kit, were tossed carelessly across the back seat like trash. The gas tank was practically empty, as if she'd taken pleasure in using every last drop. She didn't even have it for a full day. I murmured, stunned. A voice behind me replied, 8 hours. I turned to find Officer Ruiz standing nearby. I blinked. 8 hours? She nodded. Some people treat what they earn differently than what they take. Her words, matter of fact and unembellished, carved a truth I'd been trying not to see for years. Elena wasn't unlucky. She wasn't fragile. She wasn't trying her best. She was simply accustomed to being shielded from consequences, and everyone around her had taught her that the world would bend, so she didn't have to. But the world hadn't bent this time. After finishing the paperwork, Ruiz handed me the keys but paused before walking away. "Whatever comes next," she said. "Don't confuse accountability with cruelty." That line echoed in my head the entire drive home. Because for the first time, I wondered if holding someone responsible wasn't unkind, but necessary. And as I would soon learn, accountability was only the beginning, because the courtroom would reveal truths my family had spent decades trying to bury. A week later, I found myself sitting on a stiff wooden bench outside courtroom 4B. The building smelled like floor polish, recycled air, and nerves. I clasped my hands together in my lap to steady them, but they kept trembling anyway. I wasn't afraid of the law. I was afraid of the fallout. Across the hallway, my parents sat with their heads bent close together, whispering urgently in Spanish. My father's jaw was tight. My mother's eyes were puffy, but not from worry about me. They were flanking Elena, who looked smaller than usual, not fragile, just uncomfortable, her leg bouncing up and down like an engine misfiring. She didn't look at me. Neither did they. When the clerk finally called the case, all four of us stood. The distance between us felt heavier than the silence. Inside, the judge, a woman with sharp cheekbones and an expression honed by decades of listening to complicated stories, reviewed the file. Her gaze moved from the paperwork to Elena with a calm steadiness that made my sister shift in her seat. "Miss Reyes," she said, "I understand you wish to enter a plea today?" Elena swallowed. "Yes, Your Honor." "Please read your written statement aloud." The room was so still the hum of the overhead lights felt deafening. My sister unfolded a sheet of paper with shaking hands. She cleared her throat, but her voice wavered as she began. Elena Reyes, admit that I took my sister's car without permission. I understood it did not belong to me. I took it anyway, because I assumed she would forgive me. What I did was wrong, and I'm sorry. It was the first time in years I'd heard her take direct responsibility for anything. No excuses, no dramatics, just the truth, spoken out loud. The judge nodded. "The court accepts your guilty plea." My parents stiffened visibly. "Given the circumstances," the judge continued, "the sentence is as follows: 6 months of probation, a 1-year suspension of your driver's license, and restitution for all impound fees." Her gavel struck the block with a sharp crack. My mother gasped, the kind of gasp usually reserved for tragedy. My father muttered something under his breath, stunned. Their heads snapped toward Elena instantly, wrapping her in comfort, as if she were the victim of some terrible injustice. But they didn't look at me, not even a glance. As everyone rose to leave, I stayed seated. I watched them cluster together, my mother smoothing Elena's hair, my father guiding her by the elbow, and for the first time, I didn't feel envy or anger. I felt distance. Clean, cold, unbridgeable distance. As they passed me, Elena slowed, eyes watery. She opened her mouth, maybe to apologize, maybe to beg, maybe to blame, but my mother tugged her sharply. "Not now," she whispered. "Don't let her make this worse." Her. Make this worse. The irony was almost laughable. The door shut behind them, and the silence that followed wasn't painful. It was grounding. For the first time in my life, I wasn't tangled in their chaos. I was simply me. But walking out of that courtroom was only the start, because reclaiming my car was nothing compared to reclaiming my life. When the courtroom door finally closed behind me, the air outside felt strange, thinner, quieter, as if the noise of my family had been a constant roar I'd never noticed until it went silent. I walked slowly toward my car, the same one that had been missing, trashed, reclaimed, and now sat waiting like a patient old friend. I slid into the driver's seat, fingers tracing the steering wheel. It felt different beneath my hand, not because of the scratches Elena left on the console or the faint scent of someone else's perfume still lingering, but because of what it represented now. This car had been the spark that ignited everything I had been too afraid to confront. I drove home with the windows cracked, letting the cold Denver air fill the space. The city blurred past, tall buildings, bridges, streetlights blinking awake, but inside my mind, everything was sharp and unbearably clear. Back in my apartment, I made tea and set the court papers on the counter. The steam curled upward as I sat beside the window, watching the city lights flicker across the glass. I wasn't angry. Surprisingly, I wasn't even sad. What I felt was a kind of internal alignment, like a crooked bone that had finally been set straight. For decades, I had been living between responsibility and invisibility, doing the emotional heavy lifting no one acknowledged. The strong one, the reliable one, the one who never let anything fall apart. But sitting there in the dim glow of my apartment, I realized something I'd never seen clearly. Being the strong one was just another way of saying, "You're the one we can take from." Weeks passed. The phone calls from relatives faded. The urgent messages slowed, then stopped. People moved on, found new dramas, new crises, new scapegoats. The silence they left behind was unsettling at first, but eventually, it felt like breathing clean air after years of smoke. I moved to a new apartment closer to the foothills. Smaller, quieter. I changed my number, kept only the people who had shown genuine care. I created new routines, slow mornings, long walks, evenings where no one demanded anything from me. For the first time, My life wasn't built around someone else's emergencies. Every Thursday, I attended a small support group at a community center. Boundaries and healing. The first time I spoke about my family, my voice trembled, but no one dismissed me. No one minimized my pain. They nodded. They understood. And in that room full of strangers, I felt something loosen inside me that had been clenched for years. Little by little, the guilt unknotted. The fear quieted. I began to feel something close to peace. I thought the story was over. But life had one more twist waiting for me, one I never saw coming. Because nearly a year later, a plain white envelope arrived in my mailbox, and the handwriting on it stopped me cold. Almost a full year had passed when it arrived. A plain white envelope tucked between ads and utility bills. Nothing distinctive on the outside. No return address, no stamps that hinted at who sent it. But the handwriting across the front stopped me mid-motion. I knew that handwriting. Round, loopy, dramatic in the way only someone who grew up writing notes to get out of chores could manage. Elena. For a long moment I just stood in my kitchen, holding the envelope gently, almost cautiously, as though opening it might trigger some dormant trap. I had rebuilt so much, new routines, new boundaries, new internal architecture. I wasn't sure I wanted anything to shake the foundation I'd finally learned to stand on. But curiosity is a powerful thing. I slid a finger beneath the flap and unfolded a single sheet of paper. Her letter wasn't long. It wasn't dramatic, emotional, or dripping with excuses the way many of her apologies had been in the past. It was almost startling in its simplicity. She wrote that she had started therapy, that she was trying, genuinely trying, to understand why she moved through the world the way she did, taking without thinking, hurting without noticing, surviving at the cost of others because it was the only pattern she'd ever known. She admitted she had relied on our parents treating me as the resilient one, the one who could absorb the damage. She said she didn't see it then, how unfair that was, how familiar I had become with swallowing hurt because someone else needed room. And then, the line that made my hands go still. I know I hurt you. I'm learning what responsibility means, and I'm trying to be better. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't ask for a reunion. She didn't ask for anything, really. And that alone made it the most honest thing she had ever given me. I folded the letter once, then again, and placed it in a drawer. Not out of resentment, but because I didn't need to respond right away. Healing wasn't a door I needed to fling open the moment someone knocked. Sometimes, healing meant choosing your moment. Sometimes it meant choosing yourself. Later that evening, I walked out to my car. The sunset cast long orange streaks across the hood. I locked it, watching the steering wheel club click into place. Not out of fear, but out of habit, a small ritual of protecting what was mine. Standing there, I felt a strange blend of nostalgia and clarity. The car hadn't just been transportation. It had been the boundary I didn't know I was allowed to draw. The turning point. The moment I stepped out of the role my family had boxed me into since childhood. And now, finally, I understood something simple. What's mine stays mine, because I finally learned how to protect the person who owns it. And though the story could have ended there, something deeper still lingered, the question of whether closure meant forgiveness or simply freedom. In the weeks after Elena's letter, I found myself returning to it, not to reread, but simply to acknowledge it existed. It stayed tucked in the drawer beside my bed, folded neatly untouched. I didn't feel urgency or pressure. I didn't feel guilt tugging at me like an old, familiar shadow. For once, I felt allowed to move at my own pace. Life had settled into something steady. Not perfect, not spotless, but peaceful in a way I had never known growing up. I had chosen myself, my space, my boundaries, my quiet, and each day, that choice felt a little less radical and a little more normal. One afternoon, I took my car and drove out toward the foothills. It was a route I had adopted as a ritual, a long road curving into open sky with stretches of land that made breathing easier. The mountains stood in the distance like silent, unwavering witnesses to everything I had weathered. I parked at an overlook, killed the engine, and sat there watching the sun melt into the horizon. My car, clean again, repaired mine, felt like an extension of the life I'd rebuilt. A year ago, losing it felt like the end of everything. Now, getting it back felt like the beginning of something entirely new. It struck me, then, how much of my life had been defined by protecting relationships that never protected me in return. How often I had told myself that loyalty meant silence, that family meant sacrifice without limit, that love meant shrinking myself down so others could take up more space. But the fallout from the stolen car had torn that illusion apart. It had forced me to confront the truth. Love without boundaries isn't love. It's erasure. I didn't know if Elena's letter was the start of real change for her. I didn't know if my parents would ever accept the lines I had drawn, or if they would continue to believe I had betrayed them by refusing to be their emotional buffer. I didn't know if my family would ever look the same again. But maybe it wasn't supposed to. Some stories don't end with reconciliation, warm embraces, or tearful apologies. Some stories end quietly, with a new chapter opening rather than the old one being repaired. Some stories end with peace instead of unity. As the sky shifted from orange to deep purple, I felt a calm settle over me. Not triumph, not sadness, just a deep-rooted certainty that I had made the right choices. I drove home with the windows cracked, letting the cool evening air slip in. The road unwinded beneath the tires, steady and sure. And somewhere between the mountains and the city lights, the truth crystallized. Closure doesn't always look like fixing things. Sometimes closure is simply the freedom to move forward without carrying the weight that was never yours. When I reached home, I parked the car, locked it, and walked inside, not looking back. Because the story that mattered now wasn't the one I'd survived. It was the one I was finally free to write. If this journey resonated with you, tell me where you're listening from and share your own story. You're not alone.